and welcome to another weekly episode of the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I'm joined as always by Alan and James. Alan, as the fellow Scot on the podcast, I'm sure you tuned into what was the usual, which is Scott McTominay giving us a little bit of hope, and then whoever we're playing taking it away again against Portugal. Did you see much of the game?
Yeah, I watched them both. I mean, I
poor bastard.
tweeted. I tweeted. Well, not really. I mean, listen, Scotland are playing in Group 1, right? So they're playing against good, strong opposition, as they have done over the last year or so in general. And you know, again, it comes down to the classic difference between outcome and performance, right? Scotland have generally, got the better of the game against Poland, lost 3 goals off 4 shots. And then, obviously their goal was peppered against Portugal, but they were generally always in the game. Early goal, held on for a good part of the game, and then conceded another late goal. But the performances had a lot in them, really, that were, I think, pleasing. Some of the build-up play was good. Some of the ball retention was good. Against clearly more talented opposition, especially Portugal. So I don't think sort of baby bathwater is sloshing around in my head. There's a lot there really. It's tough at international level. There's certain positions in the team, and if you go through the core of Scotland's team, they don't have a top class goalkeeper at the moment. They don't have anyone approaching top class in terms of central defence. And therefore, I'd rather he played 2 of them than 3 of them. Right? If you've got a really weak position on the field, why play 3 of them? That makes no sense, right? They've got a lot of good quality midfielders, decent quality in the sort of wide forward areas, and then nobody of any great quality up front. I mean, Shea Adams is probably the most functional in that he at least can press to a high standard. And he works his ass off. So that's 3 out of the 4 spine positions, if you like, where Scotland are sadly lacking, and then they're over endowed probably in the midfield and wide forward areas to some extent. So that's the way it goes, right? International level, and Steve Clarke's got Scotland to 2 tournaments. That's a big improvement on what we have been doing. So I'm minded not to fall in with all the doom and gloom. I get that the results have been poor, but I saw a lot in those 2 performances that I thought was encouraging, at least. So I'm kind of not minded to get hysterical at this point.
Fair enough. That's what I'm here for. So, yeah. James, I don't know what you're giggling at, because I don't usually pay much heed to the US men's national team apart from the fact that were they the opponents that our very own Alistair Johnston limped off the field to this past weekend?
Yes, we Americans just got our asses kicked by the Canadians on our own turf with an American as the manager, and one that we jilted. Didn't hire Jesse Marsh when he was available and wanted the job. For whatever reason, he seems to be quite bitter over that experience. And highly competitive and sticking it back to I don't think to the country, but to the soccer federation. So, yeah, it was the U.S. is on a downswing, no question. So, yeah, I'm just I don't subject myself to sitting through it. That's more my thing. So I don't sit there and watch them get their asses kicked, because I've got better things to do. And once I sample and say, oh, not for me today, then I capitulate. So if you're willing to sit through 95 minutes of displeasure, then God bless you. I only do that for Celtic.
Well, at least if the Canadians kick your asses, they do it in a polite way, I'm sure.
That's true. Fair enough. Yes, they are very polite while they're doing it.
But we'll leave the international woes of both the US and Scotland there for a while. We are going to talk a little bit later on about the performance of our very own Anthony Ralston, if we get a chance towards the end of the show. But the purpose of today's show, I think, is to put us a little bit back into the headspace of thinking about Celtic, where the next few games are going to take us, and talk about where those opening 4 games in the league have left us, and put that into a little bit of context. Alan, I was actually listening back to the show because I am as narcissistic as that. And one theme that kept coming up between yourself and James and Martin when I was listening to him as well was about this idea that we haven't faced a significant challenge yet in the league, and therefore that, combined with obviously the lack of games that we've had, does make it difficult to quantify where we're at in the overall standings and the league as a whole. Having had a bit of time to reflect since the last time Celtic played, how would you surmise your opinion of the opening 4 games and where the challenges lie for us going forward?
Yeah, so I think for Celtic, I would still maintain a positive outlook in the sense that, the teams that we've played, I think, especially Kilmarnock and St Mirren, have been hampered by playing in Europe and being stressed really beyond breaking point in terms of their squad and being competitive Thursday, Sunday. It's just not something they're used to. And we kind of swept aside both of those teams that would normally give us a very stuffy game, really. Now, some of that is because for the reasons I've just stated, but also some of it is because Celtic have started the season in a very coherent way. I keep coming back to that word coherence. This is clearly a strong team. I do liken it to the Ange second season where even the weaker players those weaknesses are muffled really by the strength and cohesiveness of the unit. So that's all been very pleasing. So I think it's a bit of both there. Hibs away is traditionally the hardest away ground that we have in the league, and we had a comfortable win there. Again, you could argue that Hibs are not really functioning well under a new manager. And then a derby game against the dysfunctional team from across the river there, which again, we kind of spoke to death about that last week. It was ultimately a very comfortable win, and really the evidence of that is just the absolute desolation that it's caused amongst the Rangers fans. I mean, we're over a week and a few days into the second week since then. And there's absolutely no signs of a return to giddy status on that side of the city, which is very rare. I mean, normally they'll grasp onto anything, but such was the psychological damage, I think, in terms of perceived gap from that defeat. Again, and you have to give Celtic credit for that. So I wouldn't dismiss Celtic's start to the season. I think if we'd played those same games and perhaps got some edgy 2-1s out of it rather than 3-0, 3-0, 4-0, etc. Okay, maybe there would have been something to cling on to there in terms of concerns and criticisms. But I think yes, we've played teams that aren't coherent, that have had their problems, and we've dispatched them with relative ease. And you can't do more than that. We could have scored more goals, but we've scored early and we've controlled games, and I think that is pretty pleasing. So I think satisfaction in that regard, and that's how I would summarise Celtic's position. I think you wanted to get onto where do we see the early challenges, so I'll let James kind of come in before we get into that.
Yeah, James, Alan put it, framed it well. In terms of the wider league, where do you see the challengers come from? I have my doubts about where they're going to come from, just having a cursory glance at the table here. But do you see anybody that could mount a serious challenge to us in the next weeks or months?
The first caveat, as always, is it's only 4 games. So when we're talking about any of these kind of statistical measures, it's important to keep that in mind. You have a team like Aberdeen who has played neither larger Glasgow team, I don't believe, right? I don't think they've played Rangers or us yet.
Or Edinburgh teams either.
Right, yeah. So they've had a pretty soft schedule. Have they been playing well? Yes. But, this is where you can have some sense of how much is kind of good luck, variance, that kind of thing. So if you look at the XG difference table, right, this is the most important table, as we know. Aberdeen are outperforming. So their non-penalty goal difference is about, I'm going to round these because, you get into decimals and stuff. Let's call it 5 goals they've outperformed already. So that's 4 games, 5 goals outperformance. And what I look at in looking at these is, okay, how much of that's down to, unusually good finishing, which over 4 games is like normal. Like that's normal to have, a couple of games where guys are hot from distance, that kind of thing. Or like horrible, putrid opposition goalkeeping. We have, or you have things like own goals, you have penalties. So obviously the latter, what I mentioned there, doesn't reflect into non-penalty stuff. But so they've had a huge overperformance, unlikely to persist in that regard. So like the halo on them is probably overwrought. On the flip side of that, and I hadn't even realized this. So Kilmarnock's non-penalty XG difference is basically -2 goals, and their non-penalty goal difference is -9. Okay, so that is not going to persist. So as bad as they've been in results, and I would argue they've been bad. Like for them to be at a -2 total in XG difference, so objectively they've been bad. They just haven't been that bad. And their keeper play has swung. So they had, I think it was Dennis last season, and they have a new guy in, and he's had a rough start. I'm not saying he's a bad keeper. I'm not saying it was a bad sign. I haven't looked at him well enough. I'm just saying over 4 games, he hasn't been great.
Sorry, James.
Yep.
They started with McCrory, and he lasted 2 games, and they swapped him out for O'Hara, I think.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, that explains it.
They've clearly got issues there at the moment. Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. So I hadn't paid attention to him enough. I was just looking at kind of a high level. So if you go through kind of the XG table, it's lining up similar. Aberdeen's 3rd, Motherwell 4th, but Motherwell has been absolutely dominant on set pieces. So in open play, they haven't been very good. And that's good coaching. That's profiling of their squad, but that's also something that might lend itself to some variance. Scoring off headers, scoring off corners, free kicks, that kind of thing tends to.
Speaking as an ignorant statistician, what difference does that make a difference to XG? Like, do your XG for your set piece chances and your corners tend to skew larger than most outfield XG chances?
So that's a great question. This is where there's major differences in XG models. So the more factors you account for, the better the quality of the model and reflecting reality in smaller sample sizes. So that's the thing. As you go out to 10,000 corners, then most XG models are going to kind of move towards each other. As you get into, let's say, 10 or 20 corners, something like StatsBomb's XG model that accounts for the height of the ball. So the ball gets whipped in on a corner. If the guy has to jump as much as he can and it just nicks off his hair and goes towards the goal, kind of the old XG models, let's say Opta or Y-Scout, would count that the similar as if he was just a small leap and a direct header straight at the goal, like what we would consider a sitter as far as headers can be. So the dated XG models don't really account for that variable, whereas something like a StatsBomb model does. So you'll see a big difference on a game-to-game basis from, let's say, StatsBomb versus Opta, particularly in Scotland, League One in England, where there's a lot of aerial shooting going on, where the StatsBomb model, I think, is significantly more accurate in that regard. And just to give you an idea, like a really good, what most people would consider a very high quality corner opportunity off a header that maybe isn't a free header, but isn't one where a guy's like twisted and contorted and got a guy hanging off of him, is probably around 10, like a 0.10 XG, right? A really, really good one might be up to like 0.15. So, whereas your average corner, if you flush it all out, it's like 3%. So corners are not, or even less, 2%. So depending on the deliverer, like that's small margin. Somebody like David Turnbull, who was a really good dead ball deliverer, was one of his big strengths. James Tavernier, who's historically been a pretty good dead ball deliverer. Like these guys, you're taking maybe from a 2% chance to a 2.5% chance on average over 100 different 100 corners, that kind of thing. So yeah, generally speaking, they're not high quality, but you have a hot corner taker. Guys go through stretches where they're really delivering the ball. Seasonally, maybe the wind hasn't been as bad. I don't know. I haven't been at Motherwell's ground during their games, but this time of year, maybe you get a little bit better weather than you do in the dead of winter in February, where the wind's whipping stuff around. So yeah, so they've really been delivering quality in their set pieces and scoring off of them at a rate that's probably not going to be, sustainable at this level. So they're fourth, and a solid fourth. Then you got Dundee United, Hearts, right? So as much as they're relative to where they are in the overall table,
Wow.
relative to how much fun we're having in making fun of their manager, and I would argue he is a bad manager. Their talent level is reflecting their underlying talent level is reflecting, I would argue, what's in the XG table kind of more normal. And then you got Dundee, Kilmarnock, St Johnstone, Hibs. Hibs have been putrid just generally, St Mirren, and Ross County. So that's kind of the non-penalty XG differential table. And then the big outliers, as I said, was Kilmarnock. Hearts is about -2, so not a huge one. Aberdeen, the big outlier. And you want to guess who other than Aberdeen, the biggest outlier from non-penalty XG difference? Celtic. And that's again, we've had another bout here of opposition keepers not being great against us is a big part of that. So, and again, we enjoyed making fun of Butlin, so he's not been good against us. But a couple of the other keepers let in some not great finishes that we were able to score on. So yeah, that's so within like the title race, what I would say is Kilmarnock are not going to be this bad. I would expect Kilmarnock, particularly as the winter comes and they kind of get this advantage at home in the way they play and they can leverage their home park. I would expect them to go on a run at some point. And I do. I think Hearts, whether it's because they end up sacking a bad manager, but even if they don't, I think they have enough quality. Shanklin's been putrid so far. That won't probably last, meaning that he's going to score at some point, even if it's not at the ridiculously unsustainable rate that he did last season. And, Al and I share, they actually signed some decent players. Like they actually have what I would consider for domestic, like a pretty good squad of talent. But he really just hasn't figured out how to use them. So yeah, I would expect Hearts to come on, but I think Aberdeen are there for the run. I don't think this is like, even as their variance kind of settles back and they play some better teams. Like I think they've got, barring some kind of crazy injury situation, I think they've got enough quality there. I like what the manager's doing. He seems to be coherent. Like if you look at, one of my things, yes, they haven't played great teams, but their XG per shot differential for the real nerds out there. So the average chance that they're conceding versus the average chance that they're generating is really good. And that, that's even if you're playing teams that you should be beating, like probably you could argue they have been, you want to see that. So they're delivering on that. So that's the kind of thing I think it's more sustainable. And, they're not conceding, a lot of open chances. They seem to be organized. They're not getting hit in transition or on the counter. So reputation was there too with this guy from Ellsberg. So I think he's probably more likely than not a good manager. He's going to have them organized. He has a clear way he wants to play. So I think they'll be there for the duration. But I do think the two whipping boys in Kilmarnock and Hearts will probably bounce back. I hope they keep Naismith indefinitely because he'd probably mute that. But if they were to fire him and hire someone that's competent, then I'd actually, be a lot more worried about Hearts maybe coming on for third and being able to even recover.
Well, I mean, you've burst my bubble as far as enjoying Hearts and Kilmarnock propping up the table, because I couldn't think of two better teams to occupy the positions that they do. I hope, like you say, they keep a hold of Naismith, and we will talk about them as our upcoming opponents a little bit later. Alan, I just wanted to ask, obviously, what your thoughts were on the table as a whole, how James broke it down. I don't know how it stacks up in terms of how things normally go at the start of this season, but I was quite surprised to see that the bottom four teams at this point, from ninth, so from Hibs down to Kilmarnock, which includes Ross County and Hearts, none of the four of them have got a single victory so far. And despite the fact that looking through that table, we've got, in terms of Scottish football, you've got basically all the giants in there: Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen, Dundee United, Hibs, Hearts. I do wonder about the strength of the league overall this season. And I know James touched on Hearts making some good signings, but have you seen enough of the league in general to make an opinion on how strong the league is in general that we're facing this season?
Well, I think you've seen that in the European qualifiers, unfortunately. Kilmarnock and Hearts were clearly the third and fourth best teams in the league last season. I would arguably have flipped them round, but we're talking pennies here, really, in terms of difference. And they did not do well in the European ties that they've faced with at the moment, and neither did St Mirren, unfortunately. So that really tells you the strength of the league. The fact that we can't, we're losing to teams from Norway is not good. I know Hearts beat Rosenborg in the end, but these are teams that, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, Scottish teams would have dispatched, with a number of goals behind them as well. So that's an indication of, in modern times, really, where the league is. I think the slight upside to it, I do agree with James. I think Kilmarnock and Hearts, after 4 games, right, you're really looking for the signals in the data, because there's a lot of noise. But I think actually, I agree with them. Kilmarnock and Hearts do have inherent quality. McInnes is a good manager at this level. Hearts do have a good squad. I think they will improve. The interesting one is Aberdeen, because of the storming start. They've made nine wins now. If you go through a lot of their data, they've actually already settled. If you look at some of the key, both defensive and attacking and creative metrics, they're kind of third or fourth best in the league, and it's really consistent. Which they've almost sort of settled into where I think they might finish anyway. The outliers, in terms of explaining why have they done so much better than they had done last season. There's a couple really of just unsustainable bits of information. So one of them is that they've actually scored from 53% of the shots on target in the league so far. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, Celtic are up at 38%, so even that's pretty high. But 53%, they're not going to score from 53% of on-target shots as the season progresses. It just ain't going to happen. And at the other end of the pitch, the opposition have scored from 15% of shots on target. So that's a massive differential. So what that speaks to is...
Just to jump in there, Alan, as well, just because I feel that this is my role here. I don't have any context for those numbers in terms of what you would normally expect. So you're saying, obviously, the 52% is massively high. The 15% of shots conceded. In terms of those two figures, how far out from the kind of average are they?
So I think with shots on target, you're really looking at around about 35%, probably being a kind of a normal for in any league. I need to back that up by that's not a precise number. It's just from memory. It'd be around about 35%. So if you're on the one side 53, on the other side 15, you're seeing positive variance at both ends of that. Both ends of the pitch. Now, some of that is, given that they've lost Majowski as well, they've actually had 14 different goal scorers so far. We're barely out of August, and they've already had 14 different goal scorers. Now they had a gentle League Cup group. They had a gentle draw in the first round of the League Cup knockout, and they've had a relatively gentle league fixtures. So I think you've got to take that into consideration. But having said all that, one of the reasons for it is they signed the lad, the goalkeeper Mitov from St Johnstone. Now he's arguably the best shot stopper in the league last season. He's not so good with the ball at his feet, but in terms of shot stopping, he was excellent last season. And that may be their keeper StatsBomb on ball value. Their goalkeeper on ball value is something like 0.3, which is very high for a goalkeeper essentially already. They've also got the highest shot on ball value from StatsBomb, I think 0.55, which again is incredibly high, and I can't see that being sustained. So they've done really well at both ends of the pitch. The goalkeeper's playing well. A variety of players have been scoring goals for them, and they've been outperforming their XG, as James says. So I don't think those things will continue. The underlying sort of creative type metrics, the underlying metrics around XG and so forth, has them around third or fourth in the league at the moment. I think that's a more realistic long-term outlook for where I think they will end up. But listen, what you cannot discount is the fact that they've got a very settled team. They've played the same formation in every game. They've played more or less the same lineup in every game. And the new manager, Jimmy Thelen, he seems to have, and it's very early, but he seems to have improved players. Now, this is a really good sign. If you want a sign of a good manager adding value, it's players like Rubicic, Shinnie, McGrath, who weren't particularly consistent. Shinnie is 33 now; he's getting older. McGrath was incredibly inconsistent. And Rubicic was a red card, every time he walked on the pitch. By the looks, and those players have actually performed really well and really consistently. I'm picking on those three. You could apply it as well to Nicky Devlin, the right back, the young left back Mackenzie. They brought in a lad from the League of Ireland, Malloy, who's settled in very well. So they look like they've recruited well, but it looks like the manager's getting more out of the squad than the individual talents. And the sort of smart signing, the Moneyball signing, if you want to use an overused phrase, is in midfield where he's brought in a player from Elfsborg that he knows, Heltner Nilsson, who's a 32-year-old guy. He doesn't seem to have a lot of pace, but he's positionally excellent. He keeps the game simple, and he's just a sort of solid player in front of the back four, but he passes it well as well. And that seems to have really added a lot of value to their team. So I don't want to downplay, you've got to give them credit. It has been a gentle start. They've not had to play in Europe. But the positive signs are an identity, a consistency of selection, a consistency of performance, a unity, manager, players, fans, all pushing in the same direction. That is worth something. And the big one for me that gives me hope that they may be a credible team this year is, as I say, early days, but he seems to be getting more out of players that had underperformed in the last couple of seasons under different managers. So, but if you look at the data and you look underneath the surface, it still looks like a sort of third or fourth team in the league.
Well, fingers crossed they can keep it going. That would be rather fun.
Well, I have a question for you, Laura. This is a game, so you've got to try and predict this.
Okay, I do like a game.
Or answer it. So who do you think, under the guise of you can teach an old dog new tricks?
Okay.
Who do you think the team in the league so far, again, only 4 games, where the way that they're playing is different than the brand of the manager, where you would say, holy crap, I can't believe this guy's team is playing this way?
Oh. Well, Hearts are playing rubbish, and Stephen Naismith's the manager, so fair enough. I hate to say it, and this is going to be the next thing that's going to get clipped up, right? I actually think Derek McInnes is quite a good football manager. And so the start that Kilmarnock have made slightly surprises me in comparison to most other teams.
Reasonable guess, good guess, but wrong.
Okay.
Alan, do you have a guess?
Is it Levine at St Johnstone?
It is. It is the great Craig Levine, who has all of a sudden turned into a possession-dominant, high-pressing machine. And it's not working out well for him.
He's got 2 decent forwards. That makes a big difference.
He does, in fairness to him. But no, that was just another one that jumped out at me. I was like, what? I looked at like who's leading in possession. I'm like, St. Johnstone, what the hell's going on here? And here enough, yeah, they're being relatively aggressive with their press and even high up the pitch some, which,
I will
so we'll
be
see how that works out.
I'll be completely honest. I totally forgot Craig Levein was the St Johnstone manager. If you'd asked me right now who the St Johnstone manager was, I'd have said, I have no idea. And to me, Craig Levein is most memorable for the best single quote in Scottish football history, which is regrets. No, it's a good laugh, isn't it? Which I absolutely adore. I absolutely adore as a mantra that I try to live by.
So, Laura, sorry, before
yeah.
we move on to this topic, just one last thing. So, if they do chase James Tavernier out of the club, either because they need his wages for other things like getting rid of aliens under the stand or whatever it might be, we don't know. Or if they do chase him out, or because they think he's a trout bag, then that would change my opinion in terms of whether the extent to which second place is up for grabs. He is so important to them. I know that his pace is going. I know he's never been the best defender, but in terms of ball progression, creative passing, dead ball delivery that James mentioned, as well as the most prodigious penalty taker in world football. But you add all those things together, he would be a massive loss. I actually dug into his creative and ball progression numbers in games versus Celtic. Because again, the trope that's used is he's garbage against Celtic in the derbies matches. He is by miles the most creative passer in those games for the Rangers, and so I still think they'll finish. I think they'll finish second, but if they chase him out, I reserve the right to to change my mind on that one.
Well, I haven't finished. Sorry, I haven't finished my, and I'm going to do a write up on the Substack at some point, but I haven't quite finished my benchmarking of their transfer window. But when I was doing that exercise, and forgive me, I don't remember the guy's name, but the defender that they signed on loan from Feyenoord, who was in Austria last season, played most of last season at ding ding ding, right back. He does profile more like a center back, but at least my opinion. But he played the whole season at right back. So, and they've got Sterling. So, have at that.
Zero creative passing,
right?
Almost.
Right.
We shall see. We shall see. I mean, I hold out hope that for the same reasons that Tavernier leaves, because I don't think some of the Rangers support know what they've got there. Not a great defender by any means, but certainly creates and scores lots of goals for them, much more than a right back should do. But we all know some of the reasons for that, at least. James, I'm going to come back to you to talk about our upcoming opponents this weekend. We are playing Hearts at Celtic Park. I think it's a 3:00 kickoff on a Saturday, which is a shocker, but yeah. I looked at the head-to-head because you guys are being a bad influence on me, and I am dipping my toes slightly into... I mean, you guys won't call it statistics. I call it statistics. But the head-to-head, we've actually lost 2 of the last 3 games against Hearts. We lost, I think, 2-0 at both Tynecastle and Celtic Park. We beat them 3-0 at Celtic Park towards the tail end of last season. Bearing in mind there have been some changes to Celtic's lineup, there have been significant changes to Hearts' lineup. How much of a bearing does that have on the upcoming game, do you think? Will it figure heavily in people's minds, do you think? Does it have any bearing in terms of what the confidence level of Hearts might be going into the game, or the nervousness of Celtic on the other end?
Yeah, this is similar to going into the Derby match. I think the context of this game align almost alarmingly in our favor. And so I think that they counteract some of that recent memory as far as them having some success at Celtic Park. There were some extenuating circumstances, and these are not excuses, but, we're not the same team we were at that point as far as availability, who's playing in defense. There were red cards, I think, involved in one match or a red card in one match. So yes, I particularly it being at home, this, and also, and then one never knows because he's been so schizophrenic. So it's plausible, given that Naismith decides to come in and play defensive and narrow, which continues to be my worry of a well-coached team doing that. We know they won't be well coached, most likely, but they could come in playing relatively narrow and defensive, and they have the quality and the athletes that could create more of a headache. I'm not saying that they would be favorites by any means, but that would make me more nervous. Take me from like a 5% probability of us dropping points to maybe triple that kind of thing. So still very unlikely, but just a material shift. But he's shown no inclination to do that in the past. He's under pressure. I would think, the general mood wouldn't be great given that. Given that you've got a manager that's been kind of incoherently chopping and changing, I can imagine that not being all of that well delighted in a changing room, if we're going to speculate on that kind of thing. So, this should be a game. Now, the caveat to all this is, I always say going into these games, when everything looks so obvious in one direction, I get nervous. And as a contrarian, I say, okay, well, what could go wrong? And what could go wrong is that they've got a striker who is a good finisher, who has not hit the broadside of a barn this season yet. So could Shanklin score on 2 20-yard type chances, top shelving, of course? Could they score off of a set piece where, we've actually been pretty good on set pieces in recent history? Sure. So those kind of variance things are what I worry about, kind of head to head, like the fundamentals of the game. I'm actually, pretty confident, even more so than normal. You would think, playing against Hearts at home, this should be a game that we handle. And if we don't, it better be variance. That's all I have to say. we better not screw it up that bad that we actually legitimately lose the Hearts.
Yeah, I mean, Alan, James brings up a good point there about Shanklin. Just because he hasn't started well doesn't mean that he's not going to suddenly find form in the next game. Another player who I think always strikes me as slightly dangerous is Jan Danda, who I think could create for us. Again, I don't have any statistical notes to back that up, but I think there's enough there that if they come and find their feet on the day, do you agree with what I'm saying and what James has alluded to, that there's enough there to potentially cause us problems?
There is, but it's potential at this stage. They've shown no evidence this season of Naismith getting that configuration optimally right in terms of his players. They have got a talented squad, but just a few examples. They're playing Shanklin almost as a number 10, and they've got Vargas right on the last defender. And I think the idea is that Shanklin, who is capable of playing quite cute little through balls, and he's a strong lad. He's not particularly tall, but he's a strong lad and can get onto flick-ons and what have you. And Vargas is a quick, busy player. I think that's the thinking. But it ends up being that they're actually quite stretched. Vargas gets isolated because Shanklin can barely run, by the way, right? So if you launch the ball at Shanklin and he heads the ball on, he's not going to get into the box, right? Vargas is quite quick. Shanklin most definitely isn't, and so they've been lacking the ability. And their defence, by the way, is very deep. So James mentioned there about one of the criticisms of Naismith this season is he's been far too defensive, far too cautious. So not only has he, chopped and changed 3 at the back, 4 at the back, etc. He's also been overly cautious, and some of those creative players like Danda, like Blair Spittle. I've been mocked by some Celtic fans for stating the fact that Blair Spittle has been one, outside of the top 2, arguably one of the 2 best attacking midfielders in the league for the last 2 seasons. That was a really, really smart move. I would have been happy for Celtic to have signed Blair Spittle as a squad player for free. I think he would have contributed throughout. He wouldn't be a starter, but he would have contributed. So they've got some talented players. Naismith's not been able to configure that attacking midfield. And he's ended up, I know you said they had a lot of new players, Laura, and that recruitment did look good, but he's kind of fallen back to the sort of tried and trusted, and he doesn't know what to do with these new players. And they've kind of flitted in and out of the team, being used in different roles. Shankland, as I say, is too deep. The defence is very deep. And they've been playing far too defensively. They've also had bad luck at goalkeeper. I think Xander Clark got injured. Craig Gordon's been drafted back in. That tends to unsettle teams. They have by far the highest number of attempted crosses in the league, which hints at, if that it's the sort of the old David Moyes strategy, just bang it in the box from anywhere type of thing. That's not a good sign. The warning signs are there. They're giving up goals. They're getting hit on the break a lot, conceding goals in transition, and they have a very, very low XG per shot that they're actually manufacturing themselves. If you read articles from their own supporters, it's that lack of creativity that has been the major issue for them this season. And again, that speaks to, they have some of the most creative players in the league outside the top two, and they're just not being deployed properly. So, will that change in the next game? It might do, but I suspect James might see the defensive, deep, and quite narrow opposition that he fears. Actually, on Sunday, Saturday, sorry, I think that's the way Naismith seems to. If Naismith goes bold and tries another configuration, I suspect Celtic's cohesion, understanding, our players' ability to know where to be, where to run, not to get in each other's way, etc., etc. I'd welcome that, and I think we'd blow them away. But I think what he will do is, I think he'll again not trust the talent that he has, and he'll sit quite deep, play probably three centre backs maybe as well, and but again, Kent's a good defender, but Rolls is he's very, very exploitable. They seem to have they can't make up their mind. The lad Penrice from Livingston, a good signing, but they dropped him and played Salazar. Whether he was injured or not, I don't know. The right wing, but the guy on the right is very entertaining. Costa Rican guy, Taylor. Going forward, he's very exciting, but he's very fast. But he played excellent as a right back in a 4. And then, of course, he changed it to a wing back, and the guy looks absolutely lost as to what he's doing. Gets caught out of position, gets caught in possession, all that. So, listen, we don't know what we're going to get. I honestly don't know, and that could be their
That's
one
the scary
chance.
part.
As we literally don't know what we're going to get. But what Naismith has served up thus far has been really bad.
Well, listen, as long as Hearts don't win the midfield battle and that keeps everybody off James's back, then
Heaven help us if they do.
Well, even if they don't, we'll pretend that they did just for the hell of it. Yeah.
Just to reverberate off of last week was I did a thread back in March last year, basically highlighting some of the underlying detail as to why Hearts were unsustainable relative to their over-reliance on Shankland, how actually they were poorly coached, how their decision-making was bad, including Shankland's, and that his hot streak in finishing was masking a lot of that, and that if he had a cold spell, that it would fall apart. And the response I got from Hearts fans, because it went kind of viral, echoed a little bit, shall we say. And I hope it doesn't happen this way, by the way. And this was nowhere near what I said last week. Was not on the same planet as far as the relative importance of the observation. But so the worst thing you could do with Shankland's profile, in my view, is to make him the focal point of your attack. Like, he's a bad decision maker, and that his finishing has been where he's excelled in his career. But he has not been a smart shot taker. Like, he overshoots because he's a good shooter. So he gets into these positions, and then rather than play in, he's capable of it. Like, he's got the skill level to play those through balls. But generally speaking, his kind of pattern recognition as far as when to shoot versus pass and to be smart on the ball, he's terrible. And he's been terrible like multiple seasons. So this isn't, maybe he gets smart, maybe he has a good game, that type of thing. But The last thing I would do with a Shankland profile player is to make him a 10 and to have him be the focal point as far as building up your attack. And shockingly, their XG per shot is 0.07, which is a train wreck. I mean, a team of the talent and the creativity they have, it looks like they put someone with Shankland's profile as the number 10. So this is what we're talking about when it gets to like, okay, how do you productively use analytics and a manager who's clearly probably not doing that. It's like, hey, he's a good player, let me put him in the 10. He knows what the level of sophistication of what's going on with the decision making. But I just wanted to bring that up because he that's the risk, is that he just gets hot for a game. The way he's being utilized makes no sense to me as far as their build up. Blair Spittle, they've been playing deeper at times, which again makes no sense.
I don't think he was ever played that deep, to my recollection, at Motherwell.
No, and that's Motherwell, who's a counter-attacking defensive team. A pretty good one, by the way, given their level and resources. So so you would think it would translate to Blair Spittle being used as an attacking player at Hearts would be smart, but apparently not.
Fair enough. In case anybody wasn't aware, I don't know if it's been obvious, but we have been out without the adult in the room tonight, our producer Andy, who unfortunately couldn't pull the strings from behind. So I've been reliably informed that I have to keep a tight watch on the time. And with that said, we're going to wrap things up tonight. We didn't get to Tony Ralston. Perhaps, Alan, you'll be able to touch a little bit on that with Martin in the Thursday show, where I believe you're also trying to maybe get hold of a Hearts statistician to further break down some of the points we've raised today.
Yeah, that's right. We'll try and get somebody from the Hearts side to give their view on Naismith and the way that they've been playing, etc. For sure, we'll have a really good deep dive into that. Just sorry, Laura. Just before we do wrap up, just a reminder again that we've been signposting over the weeks that what we're trying to do with the channel really, and trying to really we're planning to bring together a lot of the content that has been sort of disparate up till now. So, for example, we've got the Huddle Breakdown this Tuesday podcast. We've started a Thursday one. We're going to bring in together into one platform the written stuff that I do under the Celtic by Numbers. That was a separate website essentially, and also the writing from James will transmit from less to be on Twitter, more on our Substack that we're building as well. We'll bring all the Yorkshire Whistler articles. We're also negotiating to have an actual sort of podcast with the Yorkshire Whistler to discuss in depth some of the key issues as well. And we've got some other new content in the pipeline around surfacing some of the match day data, and also surfacing some of the benchmark reports on new signings and players that James has hinted at and given some insight into on Twitter as well. And there are other things as well. We've got quite an exciting section that we're thinking about which will be called Evergreen, which will be a mixture of looking at perhaps historical games through the analytical eye, but also giving people some background on things like, what is XG, what is packing, some of the key concepts, etc., with some examples as well. So, and then finally, really what we want to do by bringing everything under one channel is to create a community of like-minded people that are interested in this stuff, that want to immerse themselves in it, perhaps have more access to both ourselves, but more importantly to each other in terms of the questions and the topics, etc. that we'll have. And once we bring it into a channel, to do all that requires a lot of organisation. Laura just referenced Andy there, our producer. Having this veneer of professionalism does come at no cost. Stop laughing at the back. Thank you. And so, there will be a subscription element to that. But as I say, I think that will come with the benefit of more access, more sort of subscriber engagement, Q&As, that kind of thing as well. So lots of things to look forward to, which will start to become real in the next couple of months.
Yeah, all very exciting, and I'll make sure and send over that Marco Negri article that I wrote, and you can stick that in the Substack as well.
Well, we're putting it there, Laura. That's going to be the pinned article for at least the first 6 months.
I mean, there's no substance to it. It's all just nostalgia, obviously. But yeah, really exciting stuff. Some content there that I'm definitely going to be listening to, especially all that stuff about explaining the principles of statistics, because as much as I love hearing you guys talk about it, a lot of it goes way over my head, and I would like to educate myself a little bit more on some of them, so as that I can come back and say, oh no, but hang on a minute, his XG was this, and his packing passes were this, and yeah, it's all exciting stuff. But that said, we will leave you. You can catch up with Martin and the guys on the Thursday show, and we will see you next week on the eve of our return to the Champions League. Thank you, James. Thank you, Alan. We'll see you all next week.